With this strategy, your purple rate will be 1 in 10.7 raids. Half of all your purples will be within 7 KC of each other, and going double the drop rate dry means you'll be doing 20 raids. When it comes to getting drops, raid level is king. The goal is to push the raid level as high as possible while also not sacrificing your ability to complete the raid, and 400 is the perfect sweet spot between comfort and purple rate. I've tried a lot of different invocation setups, and this is what I found to be the best of them all. This setup optimizes for both ease and speed, so you won't be dying every other raid, and you'll also be able to complete them reasonably quickly. If you're looking at this invocation list and you're worried that you can't do some of these invocations, don't worry, I'm going to walk you through all the difficult ones and tell you exactly what you need to do. The only one I'm going to talk about here is need some help, because here we are salt addicts and we will be smelling that salt as much as we can. The problem with need some help is that it occasionally gives you only 1 salt in your supply run, and because of that, you're pretty much locked into doing the path of Baba, Kefri, and then Akka or Zebek. And that's just because in the case specifically where you only get 1 salt, you'll need to be able to carry that salt boost through both of the last 2 rooms, and the easiest one to do that in is with doing Zebek last. Oh, and I should also mention that I do all of this with no sweat. That means no red X, no butterfly, not even prayer flicking. But if you're interested in doing any of those, I would definitely encourage you to try because they're objectively good. But let's get into what kind of gear you'll need to do this raid. Now, this is a minimum setup, and the first question you're probably asking is, can it actually be done with this gear? And I would say yes, but it wouldn't exactly be comfortable. The main point of contention is whether or not you can make the 40-minute cutoff mark to make this a 400 run, but I would say that there's still multiple things you can do to speed up the run. For example, you can take a Dragon Dagger and do a 2-down Wardens P2, which will save you about a minute of your time, so that is a big time save right there. Another big time save on Wardens is that I normally skull skip, which I'll talk about much later in the video, but you can always choose to not skull skip if you need the extra time, and that'll also save you a good chunk of time. So if you're getting close to 40 minutes, there are ways to get you under 40 minutes, and I definitely think that with enough practice, you can get under 40 minutes. Okay, now these setups are exactly what I brought when I was doing 400 level raids, and the first one is what I did for the vast majority of my raids before I got a shadow, and then the second one is what I was doing with the shadow for about 10 raids before I finished the entire raid. So it can be kind of hard to give you guys an exact recommendation of what to bring because everyone's style is so different and what items you have are going to be very different, and then of course how much you prayer flick or what strategies you use are going to greatly affect how much prayer or Saradomin brews you bring. So you're going to have to play around a bit by yourself to figure out exactly what you need to bring in, but I hope that these setups that I used serve as some kind of guideline to what you can bring. Alright, so before you get into the raid, you're going to want to pre-pot an Anglerfish, a range potion, a super combat, and an anti-venom plus. And the choices of all of these are very important. Don't pre-pot divines, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. So first we're going to do Baba. We always do Baba first. If you know how to do this room at low invocations, you mostly know how to do this room at high invocations, but you might not know that the shamans and the little thralls they summon actually drain your prayer. Thralls are also very useful in this room because they can finish off of boons while you're running around. Now, some of you might be used to bringing Ancients to this room, and Ancients does really help here, but Thralls will save you a minute or two over the course of the whole raid, so I do think Thralls are much better. Ancients only helps you in this one room. If you're so inclined, you can bring some chins, but otherwise, it's pretty much business as usual. I personally am very lazy, and I stay in my range gear the whole time, and I only switch weapons, but you can feel free to switch as much or as little as you want, and make sure you're praying against the baboons. I'll normally finish this room in about 3 minutes and 20 seconds. If I'm fast, it'll be a little under 3 minutes. If I'm slow, it'll be closer to 4. You want to make sure that going into the actual Baba room that you're topped up on health, and the easiest way to do this is if you have a yellow Keris, you can kill the little thralls with the yellow Keris, and that will heal you at the cost of some prayer points. Going into Baba herself, I always BGS spec exactly once, never more, because if you're not red Xing, you can easily get comboed out by Baba, and so we always want to keep around enough spec for the yellow Keris. Of course, the yellow Keris costs 75% spec, so you will have to wait around for it, but you usually are not going to get comboed before that point. Now, the reason why I told you to not pre-pot divine potions is simply because we want to keep that range potion boost so that we can one-shot the boulders with the blowpipe. Not a problem if you're using the Bofa. We always do Kefri next, and you'll want to follow exactly as I do in order to deal with more overlords. So you first dung this line, And then after the first down, you'll deal with the Spitting Scarab first with Protect from range on, and hopefully kill it before the melee Scarab makes its way around to you. And you'll most of the time kill it before that happens. If not, you'll have to tank both for a tiny bit of time. Then switch over to the melee Scarab, and Bob's your uncle, as they say. You can also put on your blowpipe and start killing the swarms until Kefri goes up again, and then finish off the melee. It's up to you. In the case that you got venomed at the very end of the Baba monkey room, then you're actually going to get poisoned here, but there's multiple different ways you can deal with that. If you're bringing a Sanfew in, you can just sip your Sanfew. Otherwise, you can actually just yellow Keris spec, and that will clear your poison, although that does cost, obviously, spec and prayer points, so keep that in mind. Now here's a really important part. The next time you get dunged, you'll want to get dunged in this top corner diagonal, and that way the ranger will get trapped when it next spawns. But in order to actually trap it in the next rotation, you're going to have to run to the very southeast corner of the room right as Kefri phases. That will trap the ranger, and you'll not have to worry about it again as long as you stand on the south side of the room or the west side of the room. Okay, so here's where things can branch out a bit depending on what happens next. So first of all, if you go the Helpful Spirit and he has one salt only in the power option, then you simply have to do Akka and then Zebek no matter what, and then you'll have to preserve your salt boost throughout the entirety of Zebek without resalting. But if you do get both salts, which will happen most of the time, then what you can instead do is you can choose to do Zebek and then Akka, and that's advantageous mostly if Zebek is not yet level 2, which means you'll be able to do a level 1 Zebek, which is slightly less threatening than a level 2. So let's say you do Akka next. I don't do anything fancy for Akka, I do it exactly normally, although I spend the first 20% of the room running around kiting him with Mage just because that will save you some damage and some prayer. If you don't have a good spec weapon to use here, I actually think the blowpipe is great. Using it onto the shadows can get you a good chunk of health back over the course of the room, and it also gives you a little extra DPS to avoid having to do the DPS check. Another nice tip here is that while you're maging, you can actually say some prayer by using the 15% prayer or even a smaller one rather than augury, because the DPS boost you get from using augury is not huge, so you can choose to save prayer. For the come phase, the best tip I can give you is to zoom out and take it nice and slow. You always want to be making sure that there's nothing coming at you and you're not walking into something coming at you. That's how I approach it. I think it's good to be meticulous, and otherwise you're just going to have to practice this room a good bit. But if this gives you any motivation, I used to die here a lot, but now this is probably the place where I least die in the entire raid. I die to pretty much every other room more often than I die here. So for Zebek, ideally you'll be fighting a level 1 Zebek, which will make it a bit easier to deal with than level 2. The other tip I can give you is to stand in the southwest section of the room. I've done that for about 100 raids, and I've noticed that there seems to always be a jug set up in that section of the room. As for dealing with waves, you should make it a habit to pop the jugs that are surrounded by acid, just so you have a little more space to walk if you need it. When you get a lot more comfortable with the room, the only main risk is when he does waves and blood spawns at the same time. Those you kind of have to get a little creative to move around, and it helps to have as much free space as possible. The one bright side to doing Zebek at level 2 is that you can always flick his Blood Barrage attack with the rest of his attacks, which is actually pretty nice. For the second round of supply, I always take Life. That should always leave you with enough supplies to finish the raid. I always try to save my Adrenaline for the Obelisk, so I will Adrenaline once at the start, BGS it until you hit a 40 or more since the defense reduction cap is 40, and then from there you can dump the rest of your specs, whether they're Claw or Voidwaker, into the Obelisk. For the Obelisk itself, the Shadow is the best used against it, but if you don't have a Shadow, then next best is Blowpipe with Misori, otherwise it's Bofa, then Fang, and then Blowpipe with no Misori. If you're using a Shadow or a Bofa, you actually have enough attack range to just stand at the very edge of the arena and not get hit by any of the UFOs, but if not, you will have to dodge them. Always, always, always tank the orbs on the east side so that you get Zebek and Baba as your phantoms. If you do that, your Warden in P2 will also not ever try to melee you unless you're directly next to it. On P2, if you have the spare time available, which you probably do if you're not using a Bofa, then you always want to 3 down for a 3% extra drop chance, since extra damage to the Wardens itself will give you extra points. These extra points are capped after 3 downs. So without a Shadow, this actually is kind of questionably worth it time-wise, but it allows you to not bring a Dragon Dagger, which gives you an extra inventory slot for another DPS upgrade or another potion if you need it. However, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, if you are struggling to make the time, then you should bring a Dragon Dagger and try to get it 2 down, since that will save you about a minute if you're not using a shadow. If you're in full Torva and you're last hitting the core with BGS wax, you pretty much never have to worry about failing a 3 down. If you're not in max melee though, this can be a real concern, so personally when I switched over to the Void Waker, I was no longer able to 3 down unless I used BGS specs instead of just BGS wax at the end of the core. So just be aware of that and try to check with your setup if you can actually do it properly. Okay, now Wardens P3. I always start this phase by BGSing until I hit at least a 30, since that is the defense reduction cap here. Now, Warden's P3 is where most of the points are earned, since there is a huge multiplier on points on the damage you deal to the Warden's P3. So in order to maximize this, we are going to be skull skipping, and skull skipping will give you an extra 5% purple chance, since when you normally do skulls, they will damage the boss when you finish them, so you don't want that to happen, because that damage doesn't count for your points. You want to damage the boss yourself. Once again though, if you're finding yourself short on time, then you should bite the bullet and not skull skip, because that will save you a little bit of time. I'm going to teach you the simplest and most foolproof way to skull skip. You literally cannot mess this up unless you just DC, but in that case you're going to die anyways, so what's the point? So first, make sure you grab the tile markers from the description. These are all from No Monkey's video, so shout out to him. And what you're going to do is you're just going to run straight to the edge of the range that's marked. When the skulls come out, you're going to then equip a long range weapon, which you should already be on. This could be your bofa, your twisted bow, your shadow, whatever it is. And then you're just going to spam click on a skull. It could be any skull, by the way. And what that does is that once the skulls finally pop, you're going to automatically click the ground where the skull was and run forward, which will allow you to skull skip without any timing on your part. The only downside to this method is that when the boss phantoms are out later, then you're actually going to have to sometimes tank one of their hits. Like, I will pretty much always tank at least one boulder from Baba, and occasionally I will also tank an off-prayer attack from Zevek, but if you stay high health, this should never be a problem, and you have a lot of ways to heal, whether it's brews, or an ambrosia, or the yellow Keris, so don't worry about it too much. Just make sure if that does happen, you heal up immediately, because you don't want to panic and tank a floor hit and then just die there. If you need help with last rowing, I have an entire other video about it, but the gist of it is 2 things. 1, make sure you know where your ambrosias are, and 2, you can click on lightning right as it pops and you'll take no damage. It'll essentially be a safe tile, so pay attention to when the lightning is striking and you can use that to your advantage. Other than that, enjoy the purples, guys. I have literally gotten so lucky doing 400s. I used to be pretty dry at this raid, but once I started doing 400s, it completely turned around. I know that's completely anecdotal, but I love 400s because they have treated me really well, and I hope that you guys will feel the same. With the Twisted Bow, I did these in about 36 minutes, but once I got my Shadow, that got bumped down all the way to 33 minutes. But I conservatively estimate that you take 40 minutes to complete a raid, and even then, you will still get 9.5 mil a raid, which is 14 mil an hour with 40-minute raids. So this is no joke, they're quite good, and good luck.